2 minutes? All right. Gosh, you give a politician a microphone in 2 minutes. Thank you so much for the honor to serve this great community in Lansing. I served, as you folks well know, 6 years in the State House, and it's been a pleasure to serve on your behalf in Lansing. This last few years in Lansing, the State Senate, an absolute pleasure. Born at a family farm up the road in Fallowville, where we still farm today. My lovely wife and my folks are with me here tonight. As always, good supporters, so we thank them for their continued support. And if you take a look back over the last few years since I took office in the Senate and Governor Snyder took office, we've tackled a tremendous amount of issues. Just going through the checklist of unemployment reform, we saved job providers in Michigan literally $1 billion in reforming the state's unemployment system. Workers' compensation, we saved millions and millions and millions of dollars to our state's job providers here in Michigan by reforming that system as well. We took a look at the Michigan Public School Employee Retirement System, and we said, boy, we've got to change something, or our schools will be footing the bill, and that system may not be around for folks who are retired, and depending on those dollars. We took literally $12 billion in unfunded liabilities out of that system. It's still about $38 billion in unfunded liabilities as we go forward, but it is one huge bite out of the apple. Took a look at Michigan's business tax and got rid of it. One of the worst business taxes in the country. In fact, Michigan was labeled or listed as number 49th best state in the country to do business in terms of its business tax climate. 49th best. That makes it the worst, or second worst, I apologize. We eliminated that, and of course, with the voters' help this past August, we eliminated the personal property tax as well for so many businesses. I know my time is short, so I will stop right there. I've got a lot more to talk about, and I appreciate everybody for volunteering, putting this event together, and thank you to all of you for being here tonight.
Sure.
Well, I too would like to thank you all for being here. I'd like to thank all the people that put this together, but I think for me, the biggest thanks goes to the voters in the audience who care enough about their choice on November 4th to be here tonight. I think these forums where you can see your candidates side by side are the most important way for you to gauge which candidate you want to support. And I'm disappointed to learn that my opponent has withdrawn from the second forum that was set for us, and maybe if you ask him, he'll reconsider. This is my first run in politics. For the past 30 years, I've been raising my family and building a successful law practice. As a mom and a woman, I think that I will bring life experiences to problem solving in Lansing that is creative and effective and much needed. As a small business owner, along with my partners, I've actually created private sector jobs by providing private sector services. So I have credibility that's unique in this race in terms of knowing what Michigan businesses need. And what Michigan businesses need is not much different than what Michigan families need. We need our roads and bridges fixed, we need our schools fairly funded, and we need an economy that's working for everyone. I couldn't help but notice as Senator Hune went through what he considers to be the accomplishments for the last 4 years, that every one of those tax breaks or tax or benefit cuts fell disproportionately on working people. We need an economy that works for working people, not that simply works for special interests and the wealthy. You're going to hear a lot tonight. You're going to hear a lot tonight from my opponent about how he wants small government and he wants you to keep your money in your pocket. That's empty rhetoric. We can't fix the roads on our own. We can't write a per pupil $7,000 check to our schools for education. I don't want big government. I want smart government that works for working people. And I appreciate that.
Appreciate that you want to applaud, but the more we applaud, the more we cut into the economy to actually tell us the views. So let's hold the applause at the end of the week. First question goes to Shari. Governor Snyder called for an additional $1.2 billion in additional revenue for roads
I think there's very few things I agree with the governor on, and the fact that we need more road funding is one of them. We have the third highest number of roadway systems in the nation. We spend the least amount per capita on maintaining those roads. The figure that was tossed around last night at a forum that I unfortunately didn't get to attend because I wasn't feeling well was that we need 1.6 billion actually to bring our poor roads to good and to bring our fair roads to good and to keep our good roads, which don't number that many, to keep them from falling to poor. Now, Senator Hune's going to tell you that there's plenty of money in the budget already to fix the roads. And my question is, if that's the case, and the Republicans have been in control for 4 years, why haven't the roads been fixed? The reality is there is not enough money in the budget for the roads. We are driving more fuel-efficient cars. We have people unemployed, so we aren't buying as much gas. I think we need to look at possibly raising registration fees, but I also think we need to have an honest conversation about something like the luxury tax. I'm a skier. I go up north whenever I can in the winter, and I spend $70 for a lift ticket. So for 5 hours of entertainment, I spend $70. If I can afford $70 for a lift ticket, I could afford $4.20 at 6% of a luxury tax. So I'm willing to have a conversation that's real and based on the fact that we need to raise real dollars. And I'm open to any other ideas that we have, but status quo is not acceptable.
Joe?
Yeah. Can you repeat the question again?
Governor Schneider called for an additional $1.2 billion in additional revenue for roads, construction, and maintenance to be raised through increased gas taxes and registration fees. How much more money is needed for the upkeep of Michigan roads, and how would you propose to raise it?
Sure. I'll tell you, $1.2 billion may be enough. It may be more that we need in terms of putting those dollars and allocating those dollars directly to our roads and infrastructure. I'll tell you what the legislature has done is we appropriated roughly about $978 million split between this year and next. I hope that's not eating into my time. Roughly a $1 billion split between this year and next. So roughly $500 million this year and the following year. Is it enough? No, it's not. We know there's more work to be done. We know, and I suggest, and have all continuously advocated for, looking within the state's budget before we go back and demand more money and steal more money out of your wallets. We have a state budget of roughly $52.5 billion. Folks, government has enough money. It's a matter of fighting for the right priorities in Lansing and making certain those priorities are going to our roads.
All right, this is where I want to follow up. Joe, you mentioned a $52 billion budget, but the vast majority of that is federal money and pass-through money. The general fund, the discretionary money, is actually only about $9 billion. So you're talking about a much higher percentage of the discretionary fund. Where
these states
something has to get cut.
Sure.
To pull it out of that budget, what would you propose to cut in order?
First off, I'm sorry to be a little eager.
Okay.
First off, the state's general fund is roughly $9 billion, a little bit, give or take a couple $100 million. But the state's revenue that does not come from the federal government, I believe, is over $30 billion. It would take some statute changes to revert those dollars and divert those dollars correctly to the roads. I would suggest, let's take a look at entitlements. We have some of the most generous entitlements in the forms of the Department of Community Health budget, as well as the Department of Human Services budget, and those are good areas to take a look at.
And how much do you anticipate that would raise?
It depends on what the exact target is. If the governor's adamant about $1.2 billion, and we have done some structural corrections in terms of $250 million a year as we go forward, that are permanent dollars that will go towards the roads. I don't have the exact answer, I apologize.
Shari, you proposed a 6% luxury tax. How much do you anticipate that would raise for roads?
I don't know, because I haven't actually sat down and done the math, but tourism, which, we already pay taxes on hotel rooms here. It's the second largest industry in the state. So if you tax things like skiing, bowling, golf, movie tickets, I would suspect that we wouldn't need to tax at a full 6%, but I haven't actually done the math to figure out how much it would raise, but given the fact that it's such a huge industry, I think it would make a dent at least.
Joe, this question goes to you, and this is a reader-submitted question. What action would you take to correct the gross inequity and the road funding for Livingston County? Horrible roads, and this is reader-submitted, horrible road conditions are a result of poor representation at the state level that has created the need to put local road funding proposals on the ballot in Hartland Township, and of course we know there are others in Hamburg and Greeno. In fact, many communities are now putting up local road funding questions on the ballot. What would solve the gross inequity?
I'll tell you what, we have an antiquated law called Public Act 51 that was put into place in 1951 and is the most bizarre funding formula. When a dollar goes into the top, it's like a Plinko machine before those dollars actually end up to doing hardcore road work and road maintenance. We have done a lot of homework on this issue, and we need to completely revamp Public Act 51. The only unfortunate thing is, it's like a balloon. You squeeze one side, and there's another side that's going to swell, and you squeeze that side, and the other side is going to swell. So there is a lot of give and take that will have to take place as we go forward in terms of revamping Public Act 51. But if you take a look at many factors in Public Act 51, Livingston County, I think it's number 8 in the state in terms of dollars received from the state of Michigan in dollars per road mile. So if you take a look at that one particular factor, it's not necessarily too out of whack, but we definitely need more money to go into the system.
Sure.
Well, I agree that Public Act 51 is antiquated, and it was drafted at a time when our community was rural and largely agricultural. My question is, the character of Livingston County has been different than that for at least 2 decades. Why do we keep kicking the can down the road? Why haven't we fixed it already? Where is the leadership in Lansing that restructures this stuff? We cannot continue with the structure that we have. We are all paying for this in terms of extra wear and tear on our cars, replacing tires at 35,000 miles, accidents that are caused by this. So I agree, Public Act 51 needs to be revamped, and it should have been revamped. It was a law that was passed it was Public Act 51, I believe, of 1953, and it should have been revamped at least in the 80s or the 90s. So we do need to restructure that. There are counties in the UP that are getting more road funding than we're getting. It isn't equitable, and it has to be fixed.
Joe, Shari has raised the point twice, and I would like to hear your response to it. Republicans have been in control in Lansing the last 4 years. Why has this not been fixed?
Public Act 51?
Road funding in general, but sure, Public Act 51.
Yeah, there is a strong belief that the last thing that this government needs to do in Lansing is go and steal more money out of your wallets to feed a bigger and bigger government. So there is a constant battle of priorities in the state's budget. That's what we are focusing on, trying to make certain that roads receive a higher priority. That has been my emphasis for a long time, and it will continue as we go forward.
To keep things even, I want to ask a follow-up of Shari. How do you respond to that? You said additional money is needed. Are you dipping into taxpayers' wallets first?
No, I'm dipping into taxpayers' wallets last because we've already tried cutting our way to prosperity, and it's not working. We've already tried not taking care of our roads. We have neglected them for 2 decades. We can't continue. We are not going to bring business to Michigan if we don't fix our roads. We are not going to have a sustainable economy in Michigan if we don't fix our roads. The governor recognizes it. I don't understand why the rest of the Republican Party doesn't recognize it. But yes, the dirty secret is, and they're going to tell you this on November 5th, we do have to raise revenue. Now, I don't want to, I resent Senator Hune's characterization of having to raise revenue as stealing your money. Stealing your money, I'm an attorney, so I know what theft is. And theft means that I take your money for my own personal gain. I'm not stealing your money. We have to raise revenue, and we have to use it to fix the roads and fund our schools. We cannot cut our way to prosperity, and everybody is going to have to share in this burden because it's been kicked down the road now for 2 decades. I wish it weren't the case, but it is. For 2 decades, we have ignored our roads, and we have to fix them now.
Sure, you get to answer this one first, and we're going to, that was a nice segue, because we're going to take up school funding next. Per pupil allocations have increased in the last couple of years, but with the foundation allocation at $7,126 this year, per pupil amounts are still down from the peak of 2008-2009, which were then $7,300 and change. Are we spending enough money on our public schools? What do you propose should be done to make sure public schools are adequately funded? Shari?
No, I don't believe we're spending enough on our schools. According to the Senate Fiscal Agency in Livingston County, the per pupil grant for Brighton area schools for the 2005-2006 school year was $7,031. Today, it's $7,126. That's less than a $100 raise over the course of the last decade. That doesn't even come close to keeping up with inflation. Hartland schools, the per pupil grant was $6,990. Today, it's $7,126. Again, that's less than a $200 raise. The other thing that's happened to school funding is that they have shifted the obligations that the state had to pay for public servant pensions, which included teachers, from the state's obligation onto the schools. So out of that $7,126 per pupil that goes into Brighton's bank account, it's not there 30 seconds, and it's reversed, and 31% is sent back to the state for pension fund. It's never getting to the classroom. So when I say that we haven't put a new dollar into K-12 education since before 2004, that's the truth. There is no new money going into the classroom. That's why we have classrooms with 30 students in them. That's not sustainable. It's not good practice. That's why we have teachers looking for other occupations, because they're being cut. We have to fund the schools. Proposal A is now not working. I'm not sure it ever really worked the way it was intended to work. It certainly didn't anticipate the economic crisis we just went through. We need a new formula for funding schools, and we need to get away from putting a dollar sign on a child's head, because that sets up a Hunger Games with schools of choice, so that all the schools are competing on a per-pupil basis instead of focusing on the job that they have, which is to educate our kids.
Joe?
You know, I've asked many superintendents and school officials in this community and beyond, what is the sufficient amount per pupil funding that the schools need, and I've never received a sufficient response. But I'll tell you what we are doing. We are spending the largest allocation of our school aid fund in the history of Michigan, roughly $13.9 billion. And when you talk about pension costs, we actually capped pension costs for our local school districts at just over 20%, maybe it's 21%. So we have done put an extreme amount of effort forward to helping control costs at the local level, and also do what we need to do in terms of helping to fund our public school system. But I'll tell you one thing that's interesting. If you combine all of the revenues that our school districts, the traditional public school districts, receive in Livingston County, that is the state's allocation, plus the local dollars that go toward the debt service for this building and others, I'm not aware of a school district in Livingston County that receives under $11,000 per pupil.
When you're adding in the debt?
Correct.
Okay.
The revenue.
Okay.
Just take care of the debt, correct. to clarify.
Okay. So, Joe, this is the follow-up. In an ever more competitive world with foreign countries outperforming Michigan schools on test scores, can Michigan move its workforce and its economy forward with funding levels for operations at a stagnant level?
Again, we are giving roughly $1.3 billion more to our school aid, spending in the school aid fund than compared to 2010. So I'm not sure that that's actually a stagnant level. $1.3 billion more than in 2010. I'm not sure how you call that a stagnant level.
Is that adequate to compete in today's?
Again, I've never heard the clear description of what is adequate, but we will continue to do our part to make certain that costs are managed at the local level from the state's perspective and do all we can to accommodate the funding for our local school districts. There's still a lot of work to be done in terms of getting our financial house in order, but I think we've come a long way from years past.
Shari, you said that this funding level is not adequate, and Joe asked a fair question. How much more is needed?
Well, I actually have sat down with, I think, 5 of the superintendents out of the 10 or so that are in the 22nd district. I've sat down with Howell's superintendent, the Livingston ISD, the Washington ISD, Chelsea's superintendent, Dexter's superintendent. And the reason that they don't give you a dollar amount in per pupil funding is because they don't want to continue with per pupil funding. We need to look at a different way to fund. Per pupil funding doesn't work. Particularly when you have an economic contraction like we had as a result of the last recession. Pinckney Schools, for example, is working its way out of a deficit, not because it didn't manage its funds properly, but because it lost the most amount of students. When you are set up on a per pupil funding basis, and you lose students like they did after the economic crisis that we just suffered, you can't make up for it. I want to address, this big number that Senator Hune keeps throwing out about our school aid budget. The other thing that they're not admitting to us is the reason the school budget aid fund looks so bloated is because every year since Governor Snyder has taken office, they've rolled in their funding for colleges and universities into that school aid budget. That was never part of the school aid budget before Governor Snyder took office. So it sounds like a big number, but as I indicated, the per pupil grant is not going up. So I don't know how much is enough, but I think the superintendents that I've spoken to, I know would be willing to sit down at a table and talk about a new funding formula that's based on, for example, how much does it cost to educate a 3rd grade class? How much, with 25 students, 28 students, whatever that cap is. It can't be 30 3rd graders. That's not acceptable. They would be willing to talk to you about what does it cost for a high school chemistry class. So let's sit down at the table and talk about that.
Okay, we'll move on to another question, and that was also another nice segue. Joe gets to answer this question first. Michigan increased funding for higher education this year for the first time in about a decade. At the same time, Michigan college grads leave school with some of the highest student loan debt levels in the nation. What can be done to make college more affordable for Michigan students?
I'll tell you, we've done taken a good step forward in terms of allowing traditional public high school students to take junior college, and ultimately, when they graduate high school, they can ultimately walk down that aisle with an associate's degree in many instances, which is a darn good, right thing to do for our students here in Michigan, and will save them $20,000, $30,000 potentially in some instances. That they can walk out of high school and also get an associate's degree. That's pretty darn exciting stuff, and the right thing to do as we go forward. We have had a downturn in the economy, and ultimately the higher education community didn't receive the funding like they had in years past. But I'll tell you what, I think today's a much brighter day. If you take a look at our unemployment numbers, they're down to roughly half of what they were a few short years ago. And I think we are getting things turned around to make certain that we are able to provide those resources to our higher education community. And I do think that, in particular, some of the traditional public universities need to take a look at some additional cost-saving mechanisms as well.
Sure.
Again, first of all, we have to segregate out K-12 funding from college and university funding. They're two different animals. Second of all, I think we do need to increase things like Pell Grants. I think we need to look at increasing overall budgetary aid to colleges and universities. I think the other thing we need to do is look at student loan interest. I'm an attorney, and I am aware that if I borrow money from someone who charges me more than 7% interest, consumer to a consumer, then that's a law, or that's a crime. It's called usury. Why aren't we charging these kids 8, 9, 10, 12% interest on their student loans? It doesn't make any sense. We're loaning money to banks for free, and we're trying to balance that on the backs of our students. So I think student loan funding is one way that we can help tackle that. I like the idea, and I don't know if you follow Robert Reich, who's an economist, and his idea was a pay-it-forward idea, so that tuition, a young person would sign up for a college course, and their tuition would be waived until they graduated, at which time they would pay a percentage of their income back to the university toward where they got their degree for 10 years. The nice thing about that is it allows, all the kids now are going to get business degrees because they think that's the only way they're going to be able to pay back their student loans. If we had a system like that, we might get more people going into nursing and teaching. We might get more people going into vocational training because their payback would be based on the income level for the profession that they would enter. So again, we all need to sit at the table and come up with these solutions.
Shari, you're talking about student loan interest rates, and that those are set by the feds. Are you proposing a state student loan program?
I would love to see a state student loan program, and I would love to see a state law that makes it illegal to charge a student more than 1 or 2% interest on their student loans.
Would you go along with that, Joe?
If it doesn't take away from our priorities of road funding and K-12 funding, if you add up what she's proposing, additional money to higher ed students to go to school, to fund K-12, I fear the budget would be $70, $80 billion, and we'd be footing the extra bill for it.
Okay, next question, and I think this goes to Shari. In August, the Michigan Department of Education announced that more than a quarter of Michigan's charter school authorizers are at risk of being suspended, and the Department of Education promised increased oversight and accountability. Do you believe charter schools are performing on par with public schools?
All the evidence that I've read shows that the charter schools as a whole are not performing on par with public schools. That doesn't mean that there aren't some charter schools that are performing. We have a good charter school, Charles Stockwell here in Hartland, and I believe that school performs. I think the biggest problem with charter schools is that we're allowing them to be for-profit. Michigan has the most for-profit charter schools of any state in the nation. So that means we're funneling billions of tax dollars into a for-profit company. For-profit companies, I create them in my office by pushing a few buttons and pushing out some paper. A corporation is born. Newsflash, they are not people. There's no intercourse in them. Push a few buttons and come out on paper. These corporations, by law, have as their mission to make a profit. They have to make a profit. That's the promise to their shareholders. So when it comes to do we deliver better educational services or do we cut corners and make a profit, they have to cut the corners. That's the nature of their creation. So I would be in favor of a moratorium on any more for-profit charter schools, and I would like to see us only allow non-profit charter schools.
The question, repeat the question, would you?
In August, the Michigan Department of Education announced that more than a quarter of Michigan's charter school authorizers are at risk of being suspended, and the Department of Education promised increased oversight and accountability. Do you believe charter schools are performing on par with public schools?
My perception in charter schools versus traditional public schools, they need to be held to the same level standard, except for taxation. I don't believe charter schools should be allowed to levy property taxes. I think they need to be on the same level standard as traditional public schools in terms of oversight and regulation. And I say shame on the Department of Education for being asleep at the switch all these years, for not actually enforcing what they have in the books.
Okay, we'll move on, and it's Joe's turn. In many congressional, state representative, and state senate districts in Michigan, elections are basically decided in the August primaries, due primarily to the way the districts are drawn, resulting in more districts with a distinct party leaning one way or the other. How would you reform the system by which our congressional, state representative, and state senate district lines are drawn every 10 years?
Should this apply down to the local level, county commissions as well?
No, I'm asking about state and congressional.
Okay, Court of Appeals?
No.
Okay. I'll tell you, if you take a look at the districts, I was involved in the redistricting process. We heard throughout the process that there was accusations of gerrymandering, but it was my bill that actually set up the state legislative districts for the state house and the state senate. And I tell you what, it was maybe the most bipartisan issue, potentially divisive issue that we did in the state senate. Nearly half of the Democratic caucus supported what we put forth. In fact, the House Black Caucus actually took us to court, and it was thrown out because what we put forth was fair, legal, and constitutional. And if you can, I'm completely open to the concept of, if you can find me a way of a commission or what have you to take politics out of the process, I'm completely open to it. But you have to convince me that politics will be taken out of the process of a nonpartisan commission or what have you.
Sure.
Well, first of all, the court didn't necessarily decide anything was fair. What they decided was that it was within the bounds of what the law said. That's what the courts are required, the court of is required to do. We are talking about gerrymandering. And if we want to get out of gridlock both in the state government and the federal government, we have got to get rid of gerrymandering. If we can contact a space station, we can come up with a computer-generated bundle that sets up districts based on population and geography and not based on political affiliations. So if we ever want to really get back a government for the people, by the people, and of the people, we have got to do away with gerrymandering.
A follow-up for you is the current system of redistricting is that the legislature draws its own lines. Isn't it a conflict of interest for lawmakers to draw their own districts?
Again, find me a system where you can take politics completely out of it. Other states have a commission that's appointed by the governor, or the Speaker of the House, or the Senate Majority Leader, or the minority leaders. Find me a system that can take politics out of it, and I'm completely open to it. And in fact, if you take a look at our congressional maps, what we have in place, I would probably argue that the Voters' Rights Act forces us to gerrymander and reach different bizarre-looking districts for our congressional maps.
Shari,
are you proposing a computer draw district?
Yeah, I am. I'm proposing, first of all, when I'm elected, or if I'm fortunate enough to be elected, I'm not going to come to you and say, find me a system. That's my job as an elected official, is to find a system that's fair for everybody. Why haven't they found a system that's fair? Because it's been successful for them. And both sides do it. This isn't just the Republicans who gerrymander. The Democrats do it when they're in power. It is our job to find a system that is fair. And I cannot imagine, I'm not a computer tech, I'm probably barely computer literate, but I have to believe that we could design a computer program that could take populations and geography and characteristics of different communities and put together a blind district. Blind in terms of political leanings.
I'm sorry, I asked the wrong question. I think...
I liked my answer.
I believe that the fact of the matter is that the districts are all run by computer now. They get multiple maps out of the system and then have to decide between the various districts that they have. Having a computer do it still means decisions have to be made about which map gets adopted.
Well, there's clearly human input, but there could be parameters that are drawn into a computer program that spits out one map that's based on population. If you look, the 8th Congressional District, which this building is in right now, is the most bizarre-looking, gerrymandered congressional district that I've seen. It goes from Livingston County up to Ingham. It takes over a little piece of Oakland County. I think it drops down into Royal Oak. I mean, if there's a computer system being used now, it's not a computer program that's designed to take out political leanings. Because clearly, as you posed in your question, primaries are deciding elections because districts are gerrymandered to keep political seats safe.
Can I respond? Or make another comment?
Go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Mike. I'll tell you, the interesting thing about our state congressional districts is, according to the rules that we have in place when we are redrawing these lines, our congressional districts have to have the exact same number of constituents as the next. I think it was Candace Miller's district that has one more constituent than the others. So when you take a look at that, in addition to the other factors of trying to limit the number of county lines that are broken, we have to comply with the Federal Voters' Rights Act, trying to limit the number of municipal lines that are broken, and then, as you go further, the number of precinct lines that are broken, and even census tracts. We go down to the individual census tract, which is essentially your house, and try to reconfigure those maps to make it compliant with our federal laws, our federal guidelines, and our state's guidelines.
Thank you, Joe's chance to respond, so it's only fair, Shari, that you get this.
Well, I guess I'm confused because I thought Senator Hune admitted that this way of drawing districts that we're using now is not ideal because it is gerrymandering. And now it seems like he's saying that they aren't. I think that they are because more and more races are decided at the primary level. So I think we need a computer-generated model that takes political leanings out of the equation.
Next question, and Shari, you get to start. The Michigan Constitution protects from referendum any law that contains an appropriation, but the legislature has been criticized for using this provision to protect controversial laws from challenges at the ballot box, like the emergency manager law and the wolf hunt. Is it appropriate for appropriations to use to protect bills from referendum should this provision be removed from the Constitution?
So the Constitution, I didn't understand the question. Please.
Michigan Constitution protects from referendum any law that contains an appropriation. The legislature has been criticized for using this provision to protect controversial laws from challenges at the ballot box, like the emergency manager law and the wolf hunt. Is it appropriate to use appropriations to protect bills from referendum, or should the provision be removed from the Constitution?
I would like a third option, which is that appropriations not be used to prevent referendum, just based on good faith policy making. As a general rule, I think that when you have policy making by referendum, in other words, when you have a whole lot of ballot initiatives showing up on your ballot, in my mind, it typically means that you're not satisfied with the policy making that's being made in Lansing. And I don't generally support policy making by referendum. I would rather see thoughtful policy making by our elected representatives. I think the fact that we've had so many ballot initiatives lately says to me that we aren't satisfied with policy making. I'm not one that always rushes to amend the Constitution, so I don't know how I feel about actually amending the Constitution. Just because the provision is there does not mean the legislature has to use it. And that's where I think I have an objection. The wolf hunt, for example, the troubling thing about that is that the explanation given to the public for basically ripping the ballot initiative from the people was that we were going to put it in the hands of scientists. Yet it's my understanding that the National Resource Commission, appointed by the governor, doesn't have a single scientist on it. So, again, you get into playing politics with things, and that's, they didn't have to attach appropriations to it.
Joe?
In reference to the wolf hunting, I don't think there was an appropriation attached to it, was there? Okay. I apologize, I don't recall exactly. It's come up a few times in the past few months. I think there's some legislation as we go forward that's introduced, if I'm not mistaken, that would amend the Constitution to say an appropriation doesn't necessarily hinder the voter sentiment if things change in the future. I probably would support that. I haven't given it too much thought about that. So I think, yes, I probably would support that.
Several petitions have been submitted to the state calling for questions to be placed on the ballot. The Abortion Insurance Opt-out Act, wolf hunting, increase in the minimum wage, only to have the legislature enact the proposals directly. Once a successful petition drive has been submitted to the legislature, shouldn't it be the state's electorate that makes the decision? And I think, Joe, you go first.
Yeah, the Constitution, and I don't remember when it was put in place, 1963, 68, somewhere in that time frame, allows for the legislature, if an organization or an entity or individual comes forward with a sufficient number of signatures, the legislature can act on that question. So, again, maybe the thing to do is amend the Constitution to say the legislature can act, and it would automatically go to the ballot. And I haven't given that much thought, but maybe open to that.
Sure.
Well, there again, it can act. The legislature did not have to act, did not need to act. It could have allowed each of those ballot initiatives to go forward because the people have collected the sufficient signatures to say we want to have a voice on this. Again, I think it's for policy making, and I don't think that the legislature should be taking those measures away from the people, particularly on all of them, but particularly on the minimum wage. Because what the legislature did was not only take the ballot initiative away from the people, but they usurped the people's right to institute a higher minimum wage than what the legislature wanted to see in place. And that passed strictly on partisan lines. So you have a GOP that's in charge of the state government for the last 4 years. Their mantra is, at all costs, protect business because there are special interests. And we don't want to make it a priority to have working people make a living wage. So we're going to take this out of the hands of the people. That's just wrong.
I voted no.
You voted no?
Correct.
The Michigan legislature passed the so-called Abortion Insurance Opt-out Act. The law has passed, forces women to purchase rape insurance, is the criticism, which on Michigan's individual insurance market is unavailable. The law banned insurance coverage for abortions with no exceptions for rape or incest. Would you support repealing this law? If not, why? And what would you offer instead, Sherry?
I absolutely would support repealing this law. I don't know about you ladies in the audience, but I am tired of being legislated based on my gender. I do not need the government. I do not need the government to intrude into my private relationship with my private insurer for a policy that I'm paying my private dollars for to tell me what can and cannot be in that policy. This ultimately will be a giveaway to the insurance companies, because now for coverage that would have been in this policy under most normal circumstances, women now have to anticipate either being raped, having a daughter that's a victim of incest, needing an abortion for the purposes of saving her life. That woman now has to go and buy an additional insurance rider. So do you think that the insurance companies are going to give that rider away for free? No, they're going to charge you for it. So absolutely, I do not need the government in my private life.
Thank you.
Joe, now.
Good question. I support it. I voted for the bill. I believe, or the issue, I believe it was the right thing to do. Largely because I did not want to see our taxpayer dollars going to funding abortion. That's what it boiled down to. That was the crux of the issue. My microphone's still on? Okay. That was the crux of the issue. I do not feel that government should be funding abortion, period. And in fact, it also put us in compliance with the Obamacare federal exchanges that we have in place here in Michigan. It also put it into compliance with the Obamacare federal exchanges that we have placed here in the insurance marketplace in Michigan.
Thank you. Joe, some notes the rate of uninsured people in Michigan has fallen since the passage of a measure expanding eligibility for Medicaid. Many Livingston County citizens were also insured for the first time. What measures would you propose to provide insurance for more Michigan residents? Joe, you get to start.
I think it's about providing an affordable product. And in fact, the legislature probably ought to go and take a look at the mandates that we have in place that drive up the insurance prices for our folks here in Michigan. We've got probably 24 mandates that every time the state legislature takes on an additional mandatory coverage, it just increases costs to Michigan residents and ultimately lowers the number of uninsured individuals here in Michigan. But I'll tell you what, we caught a lot of flack. I opposed the Medicaid expansion, and I'll tell you that again and again, largely because of the cost. And it's wonderful to be able to provide health care to individuals or expand this health care. But I'll tell you what, when we're looking at a national debt of nearly $18 trillion, combined state and local debt of over nearly $3.5 trillion in this country, that's what's pretty scary. We need to take a look at our fiscal house as a nation and show a little more restraint as we go forward.
Sure.
Well, actually, when the headline of our local paper quoted Senator Hune as finding Medicaid expansion nauseating, that was probably the straw on the camel's back that made me decide to run. I do not find it nauseating to extend access to medical service to the working poor. You know, a good number of people who receive public assistance are actually working at minimum wage jobs, but they can't afford health insurance because they don't earn enough money. It isn't Senator Hune's responsibility to make policy at the state level based on what his perception is of federal debt. Every American deserves access to quality health care. It's that simple, and we have to stop balancing everybody's budget on the backs of the working poor. Because as this income gap gets wider and wider between the people who work at low-wage jobs and the CEOs, who's going to buy the CEOs' products? You know, a rising tide raises all boats. So I am absolutely in favor of the Medicaid expansion. The delay cost this state $720 million because the federal government is going to fund it at 100% and then 90%, I think, after the first 4 years. So this didn't save anybody money. It cost all of us money.
We'll move on to a fresh subject, and Shari, you can start this one. Fracking has been used in Michigan since 1952, and yes, many wells have been drilled using the process. But there are only 10 wells currently producing and about another dozen drilled that involve high volume fracturing, which can involve the use of millions of gallons of water to fracture the well. Do you believe high volume fracking is safe? Shari?
No, I don't. First of all, we haven't been using horizontal high volume hydraulic fracturing since 1952. We've been using some fracturing processes for vertical drilling, but it's only been in the last few years, maybe 5 or 6 years, that we've gone horizontal. Every fracking process takes up to 20 million gallons of fresh water out of our water table. These energy companies don't pay us a dime for that water. It is then mixed with deadly chemicals that they refuse to disclose to us until 90 days after they've been used. That's un-American. And then, when that flowback comes and that water comes back out of the fracking well, it's permanent toxic waste that has to then be trucked to an injection well, and we taxpayers then pay the DEQ to monitor that injection well forever. So, in a country that's based on due process meaning that we're entitled to notice so we can participate in what's going on in our communities, you cannot convince me that fracking is safe or consistent with our American values. We are entitled to notice before those chemicals are mixed with our fresh water. We are entitled to have a say. My opponent voted twice to erode the local government's control over regulating those sites. He's now apparently had a change of heart and he's joined down to a bill with Senator Warren to give some local control back. But if we as communities don't have a say on that kind of a process in our communities, then this isn't the America that I know and love.
Joe?
Quick question. I'll tell you, the Department of Environmental Quality of Michigan has the probably poorest history in terms of being friendly and cozy with the business community in Michigan. And they have consistently said so far that fracking is safe in Michigan. I take them at their word as we go forward. And to correct something that you mentioned, I have to tell you that this bill I signed on, that Senator Warren, my good friend and colleague from Ann Arbor, does not have anything to do with fracking. But I do think that we should probably give some additional oversight or, at the bare minimum, notice to local governments so that they can let neighbors in on what's coming into the neighborhood.
I need to...
Go ahead.
The mission statement for the Oil and Gas Division of the DEQ has recently changed from being a mission of preserving our natural resources for the public good to promoting oil and gas drilling. Second, this division is the only division of the DEQ that's funded solely by the permits and inspections that it does on these wells. That's a conflict of interest. Second, the statute that I am referring to from the Zoning Enablement Act does have to do with fracturing because it's the local community's ability to regulate noise, air pollution, dust control around any fracking site as well as around any sand and gravel site, mining site. So that is the statute and it does implicate fracturing.
Joe, you get a chance to respond.
Oh yeah, the legislation I'm referring to is Senator Warren's legislation that I signed on to. Has nothing to do with fracking.
Okay, my follow-up is that the University of Michigan study concluded that little monitoring of high-volume fracturing wells is actually being done. So it's difficult to know whether environmental problems have resulted. Would you support increased monitoring of high-volume fracturing, Joe?
Sure, yes.
Sure.
It's hard for me to support more monitoring when I don't support fracturing. What I do support is a different way to fund the DEQ so that its mission is to protect our resources for us, instead of promoting oil and gas. And if fracturing is going to occur, then we do have to allocate more money so that we can properly monitor not only the fracking wells, but also the injection wells where this permanent toxic waste is being stored.
I have another follow-up. Shari, frankly, you've already answered this. Do Michigan citizens have a right to know what chemicals are being used?
Sure, yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll move on. And I believe Joe gets to start this one. There are two major schools of thought on the right to work legislation recently passed by the Michigan legislature. One school of thought claims that the law will lead to more companies located in Michigan and bringing new jobs with them. The other school of thought is that the passage of right to work will take Michigan on a race to the bottom, resulting in more folks working for less. Which school of thought do you support, and what concrete evidence do you have to validate your opinion?
I'm not sure I was in either strong camp on a school of thought. I didn't think that this was the cure-all. I voted for the legislation. I believed in the legislation, but I did not think that it was the cure-all for Michigan's financial woes. I voted for it because I thought it was the right thing to do. There's absolutely no reason that if I have an employee, that they have to pay someone else to work for me. And in fact, let's say I'm an employee in a unionized facility, and if I don't want to participate in the union, I don't have to, and the law allowed them to not have to contribute, which was absolutely the right thing to do.
Right to work was sold to the public. First of all, it was pushed through in lame duck in the dark of night with no public debate. In fact, people were locked out of the State House who wanted to come in and have a say about this. It was promised to be a panacea of job creation, which everyone now admits it is not. The right to collectively bargain is protected under the First Amendment of the Constitution. For the state government to now come in and say, we're going to intrude into, once again, bargaining contracts between employees and employers is another example of fixing what's not broke and government intrusion that we do not need. I believe that right to work is nothing more than an attempt to break unions, because unions typically tend to vote Democratic. And if we can break the stronghold of the Democrats, then the Republicans can stay in control. That's what I believe the purpose was, and I've actually heard from some Republicans who've admitted that it was their intention to erode the strength of unions. Now, unions built the middle class in this country. Unions are not perfect. Unions started, maybe lost their way in terms of providing customer service. I do believe unions have a role to play going forward in our economy, and I do believe that they have to, in many respects, improve their customer service. But that doesn't justify government intrusion into someone's First Amendment right who has joined a union under collective bargaining rights that are protected under the First Amendment.
My follow-up. For Joe is has right to work, produce jobs.
According to the MEDC's website and in their analysis, analysts, they claim that within the 12 months after passage of right to work, there was a 33% increase in business investment, roughly $1.6 billion in business investment, an additional 9,400 jobs, again, within 12 months of passage of that legislation. And I was never, ever on the stump saying that this was the panacea, the cure-all for Michigan's economy. It was a matter of sticking up for folks like my mom, who was an MEA member for years and years and years, and whose union tossed her aside every step of the way. I thought it was the right thing to do, to give people freedom, to give them a choice that they don't want to become a member, and they don't have to pay.
Yeah!
Sure, my follow-up for you is, has right to work really cost the union its membership?
Well, so far I don't think it's cost as much in membership as the Republicans had hoped. I don't believe, and in fact I was at a Livingston, Good Morning Livingston think sponsored by the Hull Chamber in October, November timeframe last year. And Representative Bill Rogers admitted that no jobs had really been created. In fact, stated that he believed businesses were waiting to see who was elected in this coming election before they moved into the state. I'd also like to point out that the claims that the current administration and the current policymakers have created private sector jobs, I think they're claiming 200,000 private sector jobs, a good share of them came as a result of the auto bailout, the auto industry's getting back on their feet. Almost an equal amount of the rest of them came from privatizing public services. So when you privatize things like the food that's provided at the prisons, that creates private sector jobs at a cost to the public sector workers. So I don't think we've seen any real job creation, and I think that's why we're still third or fourth highest in unemployment in the nation.
We are actually at time. I have a ton more questions here, but we'll have to wait for later. So we're out of time. Time for closing statements, 2 minutes each. Shari, you get to start.
You know, elections really aren't about Senator Hune and I. The elections are about you and what your families need. We have to do better for you and your families, and if I'm elected in Lansing, I promise to fight for families. My opponent is a career politician, and I know that he's proud of his record, and I respect and thank him for his service. But the policies that have been in place over the decade that Senator Hune has been serving is not helping Michigan families. We cannot continue in this mindset that we're going to cut our way to prosperity. If we don't invest in our communities, nobody else is going to. There is no shovel coming with asphalt from the sky. It's got to be us. And I wish we didn't need to pay more taxes to fix our roads and barely fund our schools, but things have gotten so out of control that that's where we're at. And I'm not going to lie to you about that. Now, how do we spread that tax burden so that it doesn't disproportionately affect the working poor and the elderly? That's one of the reasons why I support a luxury tax instead of just raising the gas tax. You know, the working poor tend to drive further to get to work. They tend to drive older cars that are less efficient. I think seniors tend to drive bigger, heavier cars, so they tend to be less efficient. We need a tax system where everyone's paying their fair share and where we can do the things that we need in our community so that we can live and prosper together. I only want to say one more thing about the right to work thing, and that is this mentality of us versus them, penalizing our neighbors, attacking their pensions, attacking their union membership, as if somehow that's the reason that we're suffering. That's nonsense. We're all neighbors. We all live together. We cannot begrudge each other the decisions that we make and the benefits that we get from our employment. And I hope to have your vote.
Let's let Joe make his closing.
Thank you so much again for the invitation to be here. Thank you to all of you. It's been an absolute honor, like I said before, to serve this wonderful community, and I look forward to doing it again come January 1st. Again, take a look back. With this administration in Lansing and my colleagues in the legislature and beyond, we were literally eliminating 2,000 regulations off our books up until this point as we go forward. We did some significant welfare reforms that have been needed for decades. Telling able-bodied individuals the only duration that you're allowed to sit on welfare is 4 years. You're going to have to get up and get a job after that. Yeah. And then we also did requirement for community service in order to receive your welfare payment. Absolutely the right thing to do, folks. Absolutely the right thing to do. And then one issue in particular that affected so many in our community was this fungal meningitis issue. And I'll tell you, we went to work working with the Attorney General, Bill Schuette, the Snyder administration, got some additional regulations in place to say, hey, what was in place just wasn't working, obviously. And the intention is to make certain that that awful situation never, ever happens again. As chairman of the Senate Agriculture Committee, I was able to negotiate with the government of Taiwan a wonderful thing for Michigan agriculture, soybeans and corn in particular. The Taiwanese government came in to visit our Livingston County farmers, and they signed an agreement to purchase several $1 billion of Michigan-specific agricultural products as we go forward. It's an absolute boon for the Michigan economy, and it's a wonderful thing for our rural folks here in Livingston County. Again, thank you so much for the invitation to be here. I appreciate it. I look forward to serving you again. I've been honored to serve you, and I ask for your vote again. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming out. Thank you, candidates, for letting us put you under the bright lights, and really for